Well, I get to introduce the speaker today. He is on Zoom. I would like for him to be here so I can give him a hug. So Jeff McIntyre is is on Zoom, and he is our speaker today. He joined the chapel here in April 15th of 2018, and he is an active chapel member and supporter. So he is retired military, former IT director, the Bionetics Corporation, and former business owner and substance abuse counselor. He is currently employed at the Master Center for Addiction Medicine, working primarily with people addicted to heroin and other opioids. He is married to Pam McIntyre, also a chapel member, retired teacher, English teacher, and they have 2 adult children. Russell is a business consultant for Deloitte, and Emma is a solution engineer for Oracle Corporation. Jeff perceives his life purpose to be inspiring in the raising and the expansion of human consciousness and the elimination of unnecessary human suffering. Jeff believes that the freedom is the best and surest path for human advancement, and says freedom is the manifestation of the highest level of consciousness. Dependency is the manifestation of the lowest level of consciousness. So please join us in welcoming Jeff as he shares his insights and his understanding and his wisdom. Yay, Jeff.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Today I'm going to be talking about we reap what we sow. And actually, well, never mind. I'm not going to go there. A man once asked me who I am, and I said, I am a teacher. And he said, oh, one of those folks who think they know something that no one else does. And I said, no, I teach the things that everybody already knows. Today I'm going to be focusing on 3 things: intention, expectation, and choices. One of the things I say a lot in my teachings and in my life is that we have the life that we create. And for many, many years, this was not the way I lived my life. My experience of spiritual growth is growing from a self-centered, selfish, small mentality to a more expansive, inclusive, unified consciousness. And as we progress, our perception of life changes. And the way I perceived life when I was in a self-centered state of consciousness is that life was being imposed from the outside in. It was being imposed on me. And I kind of saw myself as the victim of circumstance and the victim of people and the victim of situations, etc. As you become more conscious and more aware, you become more aware of how we create our own lives. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to begin by talking about intention. And, I think it was Brian was talking about it last time, that attention is our intention, and we create our intentions, and whatever we think about grows in our minds and in our lives. I really can't begin with this without talking about God's intention. Because the reality is that without the intention of the source of the one life, none of us would be here. Okay. It was the intention for life that created life in that primordial ocean, and then to become a single-celled animal and, binary fission and become more complex and all that stuff. That is all the intention of God, you might say, or the one source. It's the intention makes our fingernails grow. I would say that makes the hair grow on our heads, but I'm not so sure about that one anymore. But the it's the intention for life that creates life, and so that's kind of the fundamental uh, springboard from which we're working today. Um, and this is pretty simple, actually, with intention. What we hold in our minds, and I'll start by actually reading the definition of intention. Intention is what one has in the mind to do or to bring about. So it's what we hold in our minds that we are going to bring about. Of course, the real processes, and let's say I'm in a really lofty space, and I want to, like Sharon said, one of my goals in life is to raise human consciousness and end unnecessary suffering. So I'm going to set an intention for that. Okay, and that intention is in my mind, competing with all the frenzies of thought and all the daily events, and I got to bring the kids to the soccer game, and I have to prepare for my teaching on a Sunday, and I have to do all these things, and those all create little thoughts in my head, and the conversations. Oh, this person said this about me and about them, and all that stuff. So I have this kind of frenzy of thoughts. That's the way a lot of us experience this. So that intention, that wonderful intention, or that horrible intention for that matter, Hitler had intentions and he carried them out. Because intentions aren't necessarily of the highest levels of consciousness. They can be of very ordinary levels of consciousness, as Carlos Castaneda used to talk about the ordinary levels of consciousness. Or they can be the most base levels of consciousness. So intentions aren't good or bad or anything else. They are simply our intentions. So I'm not going to go into how to quiet our minds, because if we quiet our minds, our intentions will be more a focus of our consciousness. We'll do that in some other teaching. But if we focus on our intentions, those intentions will grow, actions will take place, people will come into our lives. It's interesting. One of the very interesting things in my life, because a lot of the lessons I've learned just from observing my own life. When I'm resentful, before too long, I can look around and all around me is resentful people, And if I'm at peace and compassion and love, it won't be long before I look around me and all of a sudden there's all these compassionate, open, loving people around me. It's almost like magic, and I really call that the power of intention. The way we feel on the inside is reflected on the outside in our lives. And I'm not just talking about it controls the way we experience life, which is true. The way we experience life is governed by what we think, not what actually happens in our lives. And I've taught on that several times here. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how I feel on the inside will be reflected in the actual reality of my life. And the people in my life, the people that are drawn into my life, the people that I go seek out. And I'm a big proponent of going to what you're drawn to, going to who you're drawn to, going to the situations you're drawn to. The actual circumstances of my life will actually reflect how I feel on the inside. Okay. And if I take an intention and charge it with emotion, it'll have that much more power in being reflected in my life. Now, if my intention is one of loving compassion and the well-being of everybody, including myself, then that will be reflected in my life. However, if I'm angry and resentful and opinionated, or just driven by passion, okay, and passion can be anger, or fear, those intentions will be magnified by that passion. Okay. And we can see that in our everyday world. If you watch the world, watch the news for 10 minutes, you'll see mountains of it. So, and sort of the point is that we should do the work of being aware of our intentions. And something that came up in a conversation with Pam last night is that she brought up the contradictory. We often have contradictory feelings and thoughts, and the thoughts we hold are going to be manifest one way or another. And if we have contradictory thoughts and feelings, and that's really not that hard to do, that kind of confusion and disorder will be reflected in our lives. Yeah. In other words, maybe I do want this person to be healed and all that stuff, but I don't really like them, so I am kind of joyful that they're suffering. There is kind of a meanness in me, that if I nurture it, it can become very powerful. Luckily for today, that's not the dominant force in my consciousness. So God's attention. Okay, so one of the things, and this is something I talk about quite a bit, actually, and that's time and attention. Okay. Children understand that we love the things that we give our time and attention to. They understand that instinctually. Okay. So if you're a parent and you pay attention to work, your children will understand that you love your work. Okay. If you give your time and attention to them, they will understand that you love them. Okay. This is true in every relationship. This is true in all through our lives. What we do with our time and attention kind of defines our relationship to people and the world. So, and actually, attention is our intent. Attention is our intention. So, whatever we're paying attention to, okay, that's our intention for that moment. And it's really easy to become unaware of what we're paying attention to, especially today in the realm of the internet. I have this mystical portal that allows me to bring all the spiritual consciousness in the world into my life. It's called YouTube. And actually on YouTube, in preparation for this thing, I typed in, the power of intention, and I got this thing of Richard Dyer. A lot of people know who Richard Dyer is, but he's a spiritual teacher. But he did a thing on the power of intention. It was 4.5 hours long, and so I'm not going to go into that kind of depth. But I'm not worried about anybody misunderstanding or not understanding this completely, because I'm teaching things you already know. And if you kind of want to get an idea of what I mean by that, I often say, if somebody asks me who we are or what we are, I always say we are perfectly created spiritual beings. Okay. Everyone understands that. Everybody understands that. Because wisdom, the nature in us is universal. So even people, it's interesting, even people who call themselves atheists will understand that statement. Isn't that weird? But life is a weird thing, so I love that. That's one of the things I love. All right. So one thing I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of, this is probably one of the last things I'll talk about in intention. I'll move on to expectations. But we need to examine honestly our intentions, even when our intentions are coming from a loving place, okay, or a seemingly loving place, I should say. Let's say that our intention is to always be a healer. 100% of the time, I am going to be a healer. A fundamental loving consciousness, right? The only problem with that is that the expectation associated with that intention is one of disease and injury. In other words, what I'm saying is there is always disease and injury, which is not true. People don't always need healing. And sometimes we can do connection without healing. Sometimes there is no healing. You just be there together in a loving way. So it's important for us to examine, the place in consciousness that we're in, and what it means to us. All right. So expectation is according to the dictionary, an expectation is a strong belief that something will happen. That something is going to happen. Okay? The reason I'm talking about expectations today is because a lot of the suffering in our lives, maybe the majority of suffering in our lives, is due to our expectations. All 100% of the disappointments in our lives is due to expectations. Now, expectations isn't all about disappointments or that kind of thing. Expectations can also make us excited and anticipating. I'm going to get to watch my favorite football game this afternoon, my favorite football team. So I'm kind of anticipating, the fun that I'm going to have watching them get their butts kicked, probably. But actually, that might not be true. But anyway, see, this is the expectations. So and there's those contradictory thoughts. Yeah. So expectation can generate within me excitement, even joy, even, and it's interesting because it can generate joy for something that has never happened. Okay? It can also generate fear for something that has never happened. Anger, resentment, all that stuff, all for stuff that has never actually ever happened. So expectations, and if everybody doesn't get this, expectations happen when we project into the future a situation, positive or negative, and then have an emotional reaction to it in the moment, right now. Okay. Now, a lot of times, it's funny because sometimes we actually see worry, and worry is just a negative expectation. Okay. We say, oh, yes, she worries about her children because she loves them. Okay. And we actually see worry as a good thing. Okay. And actually, I was talking to a mentor of mine one time, and I was worried about this and that and the other. And he explained to me what worrying actually is. We project into the future a negative situation that has not happened. It may never happen, probably will never happen. And I have a fearful, anxious reaction to it right now in the moment. Okay. That's worry. It's also the definition of a delusion. And that struck me in the head, I literally saw that I was living my life in a delusional state due to my expectations. Okay. Another thing that obviously an expectation moves us out of the moment. Okay. And guess where reality is? Reality is in the moment. And it's the only place reality is. And that's where God is. That's where spiritual consciousness is. That's where power is in the moment. So expectations move us out of the moment into the future. Okay? And something I'll just review quickly. Things like guilt, shame, and remorse come from thinking about the past. anxiety, fear, trepidation all comes from thinking about the future. Okay. Now, another place where expectations creates fear is a lot of times the fear that we experience in life is fear that our expectations will not be met. Okay? In other words, we create these images of what could happen or should happen, and actually in an expectation, we actually believe that it will happen. And if that happens to be something that threatens us, then we will have a fear reaction. And by the way, the fear is real. Okay? I want to be clear on this. The emotions that we feel from these situations that we create in our minds, those emotions are real. The anger is real. The fear is real. The excitement is real. The anticipation is real. All the emotions involved are real, but the situation is not. Right? And that's important. Okay, so some of the fear that we experience associated with expectations is fear that our expectations will not be met, that we'll have that kind of disappointment. And serious losses in our lives, really traumatic events, somebody dying, the reason somebody dying is such a big loss is because, especially if it's somebody young, right? We had an expectation that they're going to be with us for another 10 years or 20 years or 100 years, whatever it is. Okay? And it's the loss of that time with them is a big part of that loss that we feel. And that's true of a lot of things. It can be true of losing a job or losing a house or whatever. An interesting story. Like I said, when I was preparing for this, I listened to a TED talk by Deepak Chopra's daughter. Okay, and she was doing a thing on intentions, and she actually got an appointment to interview Eckhart Tolle. Okay, and Eckhart Tolle almost never does interviews, but because he was a friend of Deepak Chopra's, he decided, he decided to do the interview with her. And so she contacted them. His assistant explained what the appointment was going to be like. It's going to be exactly 15 minutes long. I'm going to bring you in. You sit down, talk to Eckhart, and in 15 minutes I'll come back in, and you simply get up and walk out at that point. And she's starting to think, wow, shoot, I got 15 questions. Now I'm gonna have to cut it down to 3 questions, and she's going through her mind and all this stuff. Okay, so she sits down with Eckhart. And for those of us who follow Eckhart Tolle, this is kind of classic Eckhart Tolle. But and they do their pleasantries, and she's about to ask the first questions, and he says, "You hear those bells?" And there's a church nearby, and you can hear the bells ringing. And she says, "Yeah, I hear bells." And he said, "Really? Let's listen to the bells." And then he was just quiet. And she's sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, this the time is running out. I haven't asked my questions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And she's getting. And anyway, she went through that, and she described it really well, of the kind of torture she put herself through. And then eventually she surrendered. Okay. And she listened to the bells, and peace entered her. And he finally did start talking again, and they did a couple of questions. And the guy came in after 15 minutes, and she got up to leave, and Eckhart Tolle said, no, I want to talk to you. And they ended up talking for like an hour and a half about intention and the power of intention. And but because she had this expectation of how this interview was going to go, she found it really upsetting that he was in the moment, And actually, her father, Deepak, had actually warned her, remember, this guy lives in the moment, And in the moment was the bells. So I don't know what we got out of that, but we got it. So a lot of times surrendering, and some people call this acceptance, some people can call it forgiveness, actually, is letting go of our expectations. And one of the things that happens when we surrender our expectations is our peace of mind increases. I once read that my serenity level is inversely proportional to my expectations. The higher my expectations, the lower my serenity. And this I have found to be true. So as we surrender our expectations, our degree of peace and freedom, actually, because when we're not trying to emotionally manage all these emotions from our expectations, we can actually do other things and we can perceive other things. Our world becomes bigger because when we're in the now, we can actually see other things that are going on and perceive the people that are actually in our lives and maybe even be present with them. Imagine that, maybe even be present with the people that we're with. That would be a miracle. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about, actually, I'm doing pretty good on time today. That's good. I could have filled like 10 hours with this stuff. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on is choices. Because choice is actually how we set our intentions. Okay? So I'm going to start back at the base level again. A lot of the really important choices in your life that still affect you today were made before you were born. The body that you have, the parents that you had, the brothers and sisters that you had, all that was chosen prior to you entering that body. Okay? And what body you choose can make a really, really big difference. Okay? Pam and I had a friend years ago named Brucey, and he was what they call a brittle diabetic. Okay? He was a type 1 diabetic. He was born with it. 100 years ago, he probably wouldn't even have lived through the first year, but because they gave him insulin and all that stuff, he actually was in his mid 30s when he died. But he had kidney transplant and pancreas transplant and all these other procedures that had kept him alive. And he was just such an easy person to love. I'll tell you that. He really brought a lot of joy into people's lives, people that knew him. And he had an incredibly positive attitude for somebody who had gone through such an incredible, intense physical suffering. So anyway, when we went to his funeral, his grandmother shared at the funeral that right from the day of his birth, his body had betrayed him. And she went through the history, and it was years later that I actually recognized that Brucey chose that body. He chose those experiences. And he carried that light. He showed me that you could still let the light shine through you, even in the presence of profound suffering. Okay. And he chose that body for that purpose because it was all about me. No, just kidding. But he actually, you could really see the light in this guy. And it was really cool to have known him. We didn't really know him that long, actually. I think just a couple of years, but he was just an amazing guy. So he had a profound effect on me. But he made that choice before he was born, and helped lift the consciousness of one little guy. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about is that we do create our lives through our choices. And that's our career. I'm 68 years old. A lot of the choices I made in junior high school, okay, about not being a good student, about not pursuing this and not pursuing that, and not being ambitious and wanting to stay stoned all the time, basically. But the way I lived my life back then. Those decisions still affect me today. You know, and of course, if you'd asked me back then, they weren't my choices. They were the choice. They were foisted on me by my parents and my teachers and the principal and the blah 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 blah. On and on and on. It was all everybody else's fault but mine. I literally thought that I had no responsibility in my own life, even though it was obvious to any mature person around me. We all kind of know someone who creates suffering for themselves and others over and over and over again, the same pattern over and over and over again, and you hear them saying, how did I end up in this same type of relationship? Or, this job is just as bad as my old job. Are all bosses abusive idiots? Those are common. Those are common experiences. Because we don't realize when we're in it, when we're in that little bubble, we don't realize that it's our choices that have led us into this over and over and over again. There was a guy I heard complaining because he didn't win the lottery, and he was starting to get worried because that was his retirement program. That's the kind of thing we do to set ourselves up. Anyway, so I heard years and years ago, okay, and I'm going to close with this. I heard years and years ago somebody say, if I align my will with God's will, the entire universe is working with me. And it really rang a bell with me. And I said, I want that. What I didn't realize is that if my will is not aligned with God's will, the universe is still working with me. Okay. And if the things I'm holding in my mind are if I'm in chaos, I create chaos. If I'm at peace and compassion and unity with other people, I create peace and compassion and unity. Okay? The universe is always working with us. God is, the only difference with God is I'm either aware of God's presence in my life or I'm not. God's presence in my life never changes. The universe's cooperation with my thoughts, my feelings, that never changes either. And that's all I got. Thank you.